Hello, welcome back to the latest We Are Sunderland briefing with myself, Dom Shaw, and Scott Wilson, both of We Are Sunderland, in association with our partners, the Fans Museum and Cospex Optician. Thanks for those. Thanks to you for watching, listening. At one more game to go, and then we can get into the playoffs. And we said last week, Scott, that on the back of the worrying run of results, really, or the slumping results, if not worrying, we said it might get worrying if Labrise then puts out a full-strength team and they flop to a disappointing defeat at Oxford. Well, that's what happened at the weekend. So how worrying is that?
Yeah, that's well and truly what happened, isn't it? The result isn't worrying because ultimately it still doesn't matter. And I know I've kept on harking on about this, but I will always give a degree of a pass to a team that has less to play for than the team it's playing against, because I just think that the kind of psychology of that is really difficult. You see it all the way through football. So that's not so much of a worry. The worry is the performance, the fact that the performance, I mean, if anything, was even worse than some of them that had gone before it. Not a meaningful shot on target. No real chances created. No real response to when they fell behind and when Oxford were getting on top. Now, I know Oxford have been scrapping for their lives down the other end of the league, and it's their final home game and everything that goes around that. I take that on board, but even so, I do think it's a worry. Now, obviously, we've had the trip to Portugal this week, which you would like to think is a refresh, is a restart. We've got the game against QPR on Saturday. You'd like to think that the Oxford game is the last one that's going to be like that. But as we've said all the way through this process, that's the big unknown, isn't it? Is it just a case of going through the motions and things are going to radically change now that we're heading into the playoffs? Or, it has this rot set in now and are Sunderland going to really struggle to get out of it? And, as we keep on saying, we're not going to know until we kick off for a week on Friday in the away game. I mean, at home, in front of the Stadium of Light crowd, you would like to think it'll be a bit different to get this weekend. Everything that's going on at QPR, which I think we'll get to, if Sunderland can't have more motivation and be better than QPR this weekend, then my God, that really is a worry.
You mentioned there about the refresh, the reset almost after that defeat, and obviously the trip away to Portugal. And Dan Neil said after the game, things were said in the dressing room after that game on Saturday, and that's good. We don't have long left until the playoffs, so everyone laid it on the line in there. That suggests that there's almost been a reset and a refresh in the dressing room as well, right? That's not acceptable.
Yeah, which you'd absolutely hope would happen, because I mean, we've heard the right things all the way through this, really, haven't we? Players have been saying the right things, but then when it's come to a match day, they just haven't delivered. Now, prior to the weekend, you could certainly make the excuse that it was a mix and match team. Players were playing that wouldn't ordinarily be there. The team probably haven't played together. Obviously, that was different at the weekend. I mean, probably aside from Leo Hjelde at left back, if Dennis Serkin's going to get himself probably fit, I know there's still a question mark maybe over Mayenda or Isidore, but I think that's the team that starts the first leg of the playoff semi-final. So, the argument that it's mix and match, well, that's not there anymore. So, yeah, you'd like to think that after that game, the players have got themselves together and said, right, okay, there've been excuses up until now. There aren't any anymore. This has to stop now. We're going into the playoffs. We've got one more game at home. Then the playoffs begin. We need to get ourselves on this now. And like I say, you'd like to think that break in Portugal would just have helped to further draw a line under everything, get everyone together, and, reinforce just how important these games are, everything that goes around it. And you'd like to think we'll see a different Sunderland to a degree at the weekend, but obviously more importantly, come a week on Friday and the away leg of the semi-final.
If you're watching on YouTube, you'll see there running across the bottom the offer to subscribe to We Are Sunderland. It's just £1 for 6 months, which will get you full access to all our content, obviously through the playoffs and hopefully a Wembley trip. And obviously, if you're watching on YouTube, then do subscribe to the channel. If you haven't already, just tap the button beneath. We mentioned Enzo Lefebvre last week, Scott, and potentially playing on the left. Well, that's where he played on Saturday, and Regis Lebris all but confirmed really that there's every chance he'll play there in the first leg of the semi-final game, which would come as no surprise. I mean, obviously a lot hinges on Romain Mundle, but getting Mundle back and ready to start that game feels like a long shot, doesn't it? And
it does.
Lebris basically confirmed that Lefebvre is a safe bet there, didn't he?
Yeah, and you know, I think we've said it before. I think that makes perfect sense. I think he's got to play ahead of Watson. You know, not just all the off-field stuff that's going on with Watson. Clearly, the two are linked. But the fact is that on the pitch, he's just not looked anywhere like it in this run of games. Now, you know, a lot of that's probably because his head's all over the place, and we all know what's going on, and obviously we know that the crowd have kind of had their say to a degree as well. So I just think starting with Watson in an away leg of a playoff semi-final is an absolute no-go. So if you're saying that Mundle's not going to be ready, and like you, I'd you know, maybe he'd be ready to start the second leg if Sunderland need a change and need that natural left winger. We'll see how that pans out. But I think the likelihood of throwing him in from the start away from home, you know, even if he's in the squad and gets 15, 20 minutes at the weekend, which I don't think probably is going to happen by the sounds of it, but we'll see. Yeah, he's not going to start that away leg. So I think Lefebvre is the definite right option because as I've said, he's proven he can do that in that run of games that he had when he first arrived. You know, he looked all right. It might not be his natural position, but he looked really good there. He looked dangerous. He looked at home. He looked comfortable. He's got that little bit of bite and that little bit of tenacity that you probably need to play in that role in the Championship. And I, you know, as we've said in a previous vid, it also means you don't have to break up your Rig, Job, Dan Neil axis, which, while it didn't exactly pull up any trees at the weekend, I think we would all agree has looked like Sunderland's best midfield unit for pretty much all the season, really. So, yeah, Lefebvre there makes an awful lot of sense. And you know, he will start there unless Mundle has any kind of an amazing recovery. So, like I say, I think assuming there's no more injuries or setbacks, I think we're pretty much decided it's going to be Metham and 09, aren't we? We're not going to see Ballard suddenly thrown in there. Sirkin will start at left back, I would have thought, as long as he's actually, you know, properly fit. And I think it'll be Isidore ahead of Mayenda no matter what happens at the weekend, don't you?
Do you think the Portugal trip made sense at this stage of the season? You're saying there about a reset, a refresh, just a chance to get away, and I guess almost come back with it start. I know we've said this before, but it starts now. You've got to go into the playoffs on the back of a positive result at home. Let's get away. Let's draw a line under these last few weeks and start again when we get back.
Yeah, I think it did make sense because, you know, obviously they've been at the Academy of Light for the last month or so, to a degree going through the motions. I know fans won't like to hear that, but that's just the reality of the position Sunderland have been in. So I think had they just been there doing the same drills, turning up at the same time, doing the same old things, it's more difficult for Lebris to, you know, really ram home that this is different now. That, you know, this is a completely different scenario. Take them away, new environment, get the team together. I mean, it's almost like a mini pre-season, isn't it, to an extent? And I think it makes absolute sense. Yeah, get this game on Saturday out the way. Like I say, hopefully win it, hopefully have a better performance. And then we're into playoff week, aren't we? We'll know who Sunderland are playing then. Everything gets focused on that. And you'd like to think that once that game is there, once Sunderland's players know who they're playing, who they're up against, what it's all about, then you'd like to think all of a sudden they are in a very, very different mental state then. And it does become much easier for them to completely forget what's gone on in the last month or so and start afresh.
Who will they be playing then? Because there are 5 teams still competing for 2 remaining playoff places. So as things stand, obviously Sunderland are finishing 4th. Bristol City 5th, 67 points. Coventry 6th, 66 points. Millwall 7th, 66 points. Blackburn 8th, 65 points. Middlesbrough 9th, 64 points. Now, Bristol City are already in 5th. Are at home to Preston, who are in a rotten run of form and have been sucked right into it at the bottom.
Yeah.
And might well now need a result to stay up. But a win for Bristol City at home to Preston secures a 5th place finish and a game against Sunderland. If Bristol City fail to win, then it could be Coventry, Millwall, or Blackburn. If Bristol City lose, then it could possibly be Middlesbrough. Two questions. Who do you think it'll be? Who do you think would be the best possible outcome for Sunderland?
I think it'll be Bristol City. I think Bristol City will win. Like you know, it's slightly different now in that Preston have got sucked so much into it that it's a massive game for them. You know, 2 or 3 weeks ago, you would have thought that Preston would have been going there on the last day with nothing to play for. Well, that's not the case. But they're on such a bad run. You know, they've been so poor that and Bristol City have been very good. I know they got whooped off Leeds the other night, but that can happen to anyone in this league. You know, it was Leeds' big night, all of that. I don't really hold that against them. They've been very, very good at Ashton Gate. It's been the bedrock of what they've been doing. They will know that, you know, yes, all right, there's a scenario where they can lose the game and still get in the playoffs, but ultimately win the game, put it to bed, then Bristol City know exactly what they're doing and what it's all about. So I think that'll happen. Who would be the best for Sunderland? I think probably one of Millwall, Blackburn or Borough, because they've been so poor, really. I say poor, that's harsh. Middlesbrough have been poor since Christmas, and if they manage to scramble in, it'll be remarkable, really. But they've got no form behind them. Blackburn have obviously picked up in the last 2 or 3 weeks really impressively, but for a month before that, they looked absolutely dreadful. And I still don't think Blackburn are a particularly good team. Millwall, it's unfair to say that they haven't been on good form because they have been. But I think we all know what Millwall are. They're a limited team who get and Neil is getting the absolute best out of them. The den away from home in a first leg, take it, will be very difficult. That will be a real test of Sunderland's bottle. But fundamentally, Sunderland, for me, are a much better football team than Millwall. And I think that over the 2 legs, as long as they kept themselves in it at the Den, I think Sunderland would be comfortably superior at the Stadium of Light. Bristol City and Coventry feel like a step up from those 3 teams. Coventry, obviously, there's kind of all the history with Sunderland. You know, there's been various episodes and games between them. Coventry have generally had the upper hand in them against Sunderland, certainly recently. I don't think Bristol City is a bad game for Sunderland. I don't. For all that I've said that they have been very good at Ashton Gate. That first leg on the Friday night would be difficult. But if Sunderland could get any kind of a result there, even maybe just a 1-goal defeat, but certainly a draw or a win, I'd back Sunderland to beat Bristol City in a second leg at the stadium, a kind of bounce and Stadium of Light. I really would. So I think Coventry's probably the worst. I think that any of the 3 that are not in at the minute are the better. Bristol City are probably the mid one, if you know what I mean. But I think it's a mid one that Sunderland would deservedly start as favourites in over the 2 legs. What about you?
I think I know this is blatantly obvious given the 4th, and they've been like significantly ahead of all the teams below them for the last few weeks. I think Sunderland are firm favourites against any of the teams.
Yeah,
but Bristol City away first and Coventry away first. But let's start with Bristol City. Well, only 4 teams have got a better home record than Sunderland this season. The top 3 teams and Bristol City, I'm just looking now, they've won 13 of the 22 games. They've drawn 6, they've only lost 3, and they've been particularly strong at home of late. That said, they've only won 4 of 23 games away from home all season. They've got the 14th in the Championship away table. We can't really read much into that game between Bristol City and Sunderland a couple of weeks back because obviously Trey Hume gets sent off after 10 minutes. But even with 10 men and up against it, Sunderland hung on in there and lost by a single goal. And Lebrice was really keen to point out afterwards, if that was the first leg of a playoffs, even with 10 men, we'd go back to the Stadium of Light still very, very much in this tie. The other thing I think with Bristol City is the atmosphere down there was a bit nervy to start with when Sunderland played there, but once they got on top, it was bouncing. I think there'd be a real sense. They haven't been in the playoffs for a while. I think there'd be a real sense of occasion at Ashton Gate. But I think Sunderland did have too much for them over a couple of legs. Coventry are an interesting one because Coventry have stuttered of late really badly. I was looking yesterday, after Coventry had beaten Sunderland before the March international break, They look nailed up. They were fifth at that point. They look nailed.
You wondered if they might end up getting near Sunderland's point total in fourth and threaten them in that, didn't you?
And they've stuttered since, but they are still strong at home. I think they've won 5 of the last 6 at home, or 6 of the last 7. So again, that'd be a challenging first leg. The 3 teams below them, I can't believe Blackburn are back in the equation. To be honest, they're one of the teams who've benefited from Labrie tinkering with his team, because obviously they won at the Stadium of Light. Millwall are what they are. Borough, well, like you said, the second half of the season, it's just been so up and down. They've been as high as 5th, as low as 13th. They're still in it, but it feels like a long shot. They need to win at Coventry. I think the best possible outcome for Sunderland is Blackburn, but I think they'll end up playing Bristol City. I just think Preston at home. I know Preston need a result, but given what we're saying there about Bristol City's home form and the occasion and the atmosphere at Ashton Gate, I just can't see Bristol City not beating Preston.
No, I completely agree. And I think it's interesting what you say about kind of Bristol City having no playoff pedigree, because I think that can work both ways. I think you're right. I think it will make it a real occasion down there at Ashton Gate for the first leg. But there'll almost, I think, be a sense of big day out feel about it to a degree, and kind of, haven't we done fantastic to get here? Isn't it going to be great? Whereas Coventry, like you say, for all that they've stuttered a bit, you know, they're a club that have real playoff pedigree over the last 2 or 3 years. There's players within that team who have, and I know they haven't won a playoffs to get up, but I think it'll feel more like Coventry, where we're here to get a job done. Whereas Bristol City, I think there'll be a degree at least of face paint and isn't this wonderful, and let's have a really good time in it. Which I think, there's a danger that makes it a really difficult first leg to go into, but I think that might also help Sunderland a little bit. Whereas I think Coventry will be ultra professional. It'll be, we're here to win over the 2 legs.
What you would have to say, though, in the interest of balance, a few months ago, a 2-legged playoff tie against Sunderland would have looked extremely daunting. Those teams below now will take. I know there's so many mitigating factors, but those teams below now will undoubtedly take heart from the last few weeks. I think that's another thing why it's important that Sunderland just kind of offer a reminder, really, this Saturday of, this is what we are. Yeah,
I think so, because listen, the Sunderland fans have been fantastic all season. They will be fantastic. The atmosphere will be what it is, both away from home and at the Stadium of Light. I have no doubt about that. But what I would say is, it just flicked up on my feed the other day, the Ross Stewart goal against Sheff Wed in the last playoffs, and then obviously the Roberts kind of denouement at Hillsborough and stuff. Yeah. I mean, that first leg at the Stadium of Light was absolutely bouncing that day. There was such a sense of excitement, but also, I think, confidence. There was a swagger about Sunderland. The fans were so up for it. There was so much belief. Now, I'm not saying that the fans won't be up for a playoff semi-final. Of course there will be. But the mood amongst the fans is a little bit different this time, I think, just because of the way the last month's gone. I think there is a sense of, I'm not saying fear, but I think nervousness about the playoffs, that uncertainty anyway, let's put it like that. What Sunderland are we going to see in the playoffs? What's the team going to be like? How are Sunderland going to play? Whereas 2 years ago, it felt much more, well, we've been on such a great run to get into these playoffs. The Preston game was so good on the last day of the season. They're such a good team. They're playing so well that it was just sheer kind of excitement and momentum coursing through the Stadium of Light that day. And I think Sunderland do need to get that back a little bit.
QPR then. Managerless QPR after Marty Cifuentes was placed on gardening leave this week. West Brom have shown an interest in him and are said to have spoken with his representatives after Tony Mowbray's sacking last week. So we'll see what happens there. But yeah, Cifuentes has gone. QPR head to Sunderland on the back of a thumping against Burnley, 14th in the table, absolutely nothing to play for. They are the perfect final day opponents, aren't they?
Yeah. I mean, you can't, yes, absolutely. Because like you said, not only are they a mid-table championship team with absolutely nothing to play for, which is pretty rare in the championship. Even now, let's be honest, there's not many teams in that position. But they're a team without a manager going through absolute turmoil. Like, if you're the coach and staff stepping in for this one game, how on earth do you convince that group of players that this game means absolutely anything to them? You don't know who the manager's going to be. You don't know what's going to happen over the summer. Like, yeah, if you put all the set of circumstances you could want for a final day home game, you'd come up with QPR in the situation that they're in. So, again, that's why I keep on saying, if Sunderland can't significantly improve their performance level and result from what we've been seeing in the last month or so this weekend, then that is a big, big worry to me. It has to be. It has to be because, you know, they've had the refresh now. They've been away. This is their one game running now to the playoffs. Well, they need, you know, we need to see an improvement. We really do.
Kevin Betsy and the absolutely wonderfully named Javier Calm will be in charge of QPR on Saturday.
Keep calm and carry on.
Exactly. On Mowbray, just before we finish.
Yeah.
Really sad. I mean, we talked on here how chuffed we were that he went back in there. Obviously, really sad how it's worked out.
Yeah, it's funny because obviously I was there when Sunderland were there and won the game. Somewhat fortuitously, maybe. Mowbray certainly thought it was fortuitous. And at that point, obviously, West Brom were right in it. You know, they were still right in it. But in the few days afterwards, I was kind of reading stuff, and you know, it was pretty obvious that there were real chunterings from the West Brom fans, that they weren't happy. They didn't necessarily think Mowbray was the right man second time round. It's a real shame because, you know, we all know the backstory. We all know kind of what's happened and the fact that he's gone back there. I mean, it hasn't worked, has it? To be fair, you know, West Brom have been in amongst it all season, and yet we come to 2 or 3 weeks before the playoffs and they're out of the equation. So, you know, the emotional side of it, you feel really sorry for him. Hard-headed football sense, kind of see it, because at the end of the day, West Brom will absolutely feel that as a minimum requirement, they need to be in the playoffs. And, you know, I can understand their fan base thinking, well, you know, this just isn't good enough.
And you've got a fair few teams already who are going to be looking at being in the promotion mix next season, who where there's managerial uncertainty. Norwich, you would hope, will hope they're going to improve on this season. I mean, everything's set up for Wilshere to take over there on a permanent gig, isn't it? You would think. Southampton obviously coming down. Leicester possibly coming down. We'll see.
There would be a change there, wouldn't you? Yeah.
Yeah, and West Brom as well. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. But best of luck to Mogger for whatever comes next. And best of luck for Sunderland on Saturday. Home win.
Yeah. And I think we will see a much improved performance. 3-0.
Yeah, I'll go.
Isidore to score as well. 3-0 and Isidore to score.
That'd be important, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I think it would, to be fair. Yeah, I do.
I'll go a very comfortable 2-0.
Okay.
And all is
forgotten Bristol City.
Yeah, we bounced to Ashton Gate on Friday night. I think Bristol City. I think Sunderland win, Bristol City 5th, and I think Coventry finish 6th.
Yeah, I agree. I think for all we're talking about crazy scenarios and what might and might not happen, I think there's every chance Bristol City and Coventry both just win and get in.
And I'll keep going. I think it's then a Sunderland-Sheffield United playoff final.
Yeah.
I'll stop there. But let's not go any further than that for now.
Let's not toot our boat yet. There's plenty of time. To talk about that.
Well, thanks for watching. Thanks, as we said at the start, to all partners, the Fans Museum and to Cospex Optician. Thanks to you for watching, listening. Do subscribe to the channel on YouTube if you haven't already. Rate and review on your podcast platforms. And obviously, we'll be firing a fair few videos and pods out over the course of the next few weeks through the playoffs. So, yeah, it's a good time to get on board if you're not already. But enjoy the rest of the week. Enjoy the game there if you're there on Saturday. And we'll be back early next week with our Sunderland briefing. Take care.